credibility. Fundraising is much easier and hiring is much easier because now people want to work with you. This is something I've experienced as a founder myself. I got written up in a few of these publications over the years, and it really allowed me to leverage my brand and start to go do some of those things that my startups or my fund required. Even just yesterday, I got featured in Road to VR, thanks to Ben. And this also happens to be the reason why we're here today. So Ben is the founder of Road to VR. Dean is the lead writer for GamesBeat, AdventureBeat. Fun fact, Dean actually was the first person ever to cover me in anything, which he might not know, but thank you, Dean, for doing that many years ago. Um, and when I asked the two of them for some notes around what we should talk about today, this was Ben's response. Now, we don't need to read all this, but like clearly he cares. Clearly we all care. And the point of what we're trying to do today is help founders learn how you work with the press, how you get coverage, and how you can help build your startup. So I'm going to stop staring the screen there. And I'm going to ask both Dean and Ben the same first question because this is my favorite question to ask people. And Dean, let's start with you. Can you tell us the first time you tried VR and what that experience was like and how that's impacted your writing today?
Well, my answer sort of shows my age. I went to China with family in 1993, I think. And we stopped in Hong Kong and went to a mall. And in the mall, they had the early earliest sort of location-based VR there, and I played the Dactyl Nightmare game, and it was cool. It was fun, and that was my earliest sort of encounter with VR. And then I kind of I was interested in it, but when that all sort of went under, I kind of forgot about it for decades. So, yeah.
How big was that first headset you tried?
It was pretty heavy, but I don't remember exactly on the dimensions. But yeah, it'll make your head wobble, sort of.
That's awesome. For context, I was born in 1993, so that's pretty amazing to hear. All right, and Ben, how about yourself? When was the first time you tried VR? If my memory serves me, I think you said 2009 or something remarkable like that as well.
It really depends upon, what your definition of VR is, right? I mean, maybe the earliest one by any kind of close thing that we would recognize VR today would be one of those. I can't remember the name of the arcade, but it was it was hanging on a spring, and you would put it down over your head and hold these handles in front of you and rotate around and shoot. It was really, really cool. But that was well before I was doing anything with Road to VR. So, kind of in the modern context, the earliest headset I ever tried was the DK1, and it was at the first debut of the whole thing. I believe it was GDC maybe 2013, and this was only rotational head tracking, no controllers, and even so at the time it was just really felt like something revolutionary. And I had kind of started doing Road to VR as kind of a little side project, and this was like this first real feeling project that I was following in terms of tracking its development. So when I finally got to try it, I mean, that definitely helped set the course for me, feeling like, yeah, this is serious technology. This is something that actually has a lot of worth and value, and I got to see where this train goes. So partly responsible for leading me into Road to VR as my full career for the last decade plus.
And I've been reading Road to VR since probably 2015 or so. I've also been reading Dean's work as well. And again, he wrote about me in 2017. So to me, you two are like the two most knowledgeable people when it comes to AR, VR coverage. And so you probably get pitched a ton by different founders asking for some exposure, some help. Can you walk through, keeping in mind this is, intended to be educational, like what are the best practices that founders should be following that it makes your job easier, makes the article more effective, and is a win-win-win for everybody? Yep, go Ben.
Yeah, I want to step back even just a bit, just to make sure that everybody here is kind of on a similar page about at least understanding how we at Road to VR see this thing. And I think a lot of press share this. This may not be the same for everybody, but I think it's important to not feel like the press is your marketing tool. you should not think that the press's job is to market products, including yours. That's not how we look at it at all. We think that our job is actually to report to our readers, right? So there is sometimes a mistaken perception where press come in and they're like, how much do we pay you to write for us? Like, are you going to put our, like, will you put our article together for us? And we're like, what? Like, what? That doesn't, that, who are you talking to that this conversation would make sense? So anyway, for us, we feel our job is to inform our readership, and we love to get pitched. We love to find interesting stuff, but it should be understood that it's not our job to make your company or your product look good. If it's interesting, we want to write about it. So that's kind of an important thing to understand at the outset. And then another, I think, is also just understanding, like, this is relevant for all of business, especially for pitching, especially for fundraising, all this stuff. But understanding your audience is also huge. And in this case, your audience, if I'm talking to you as a founder who has a product or a game, your audience who you're pitching to is a member of the press or a publication specifically. And you should really do a little bit of research to make sure that, A, what you're pitching them is really relevant, and B, like, what kind of stuff do they really like to cover? What kind of angle? It's going to save you a lot of time in figuring out like how to get press and who to even pitch to. Like, you should initially figure out, these are, okay, 5 publications I really want to reach out to. And then a last thing is, they're just rejections or not even rejections, just hearing nothing back is kind of just par for the course. Sometimes you will pitch stuff and hear nothing back. Sometimes you'll pitch stuff and they'll say, no thanks, interesting, but that's okay. And that's just kind of the name of the game. You need to just do a ton of outreach until you find the opportunities that are out there. To be honest, sometimes people pitch us stuff and it's such a straightforward pitch and a thing that we're interested in that we don't have the time to respond. We actually just go for an article. So you can also pitch stuff and not necessarily expect that nothing's going to come from it. If you do your job really well, if you pitch a good story, an easy story, then you may not even hear anything, but be getting this press. So yeah, rejections or hearing nothing back is kind of part of the game. Go for it. Like, do a bunch of outreach until you find the opportunities. Don't bet on one publication to make it happen. So I'll leave it at that for now and let Dean get to.
I think Ben said that very well. Definitely good to set everybody's expectations right about what the press is, and how we're not the same as paid influencers or creators in that respect. And I think some more context is that the pitch has to be good and enticing and just readable as well. And I get hundreds of emails a day, right? And I read most of them, but I definitely read all the subject lines. But I was getting so many that I was missing some key messages sometimes, and so I put in like a autoresponder, like, hey, I'm getting too many messages. If you didn't get an answer from me, please write back or text me, and then that just multiplies the number of emails I get. So it's like, wait a minute. So it's easy to miss pitches, but it's also then important to have something really unique, really good. And I've written, yeah, and knowing your publication makes sense. Like, I mean, I could probably count the number of formal game reviews I do on 2 hands in a year. Some other colleagues of mine do more, but for the last 16 and a half years at VentureBeat, I've averaged about 4 stories a day. And that's a lot. But if that's the average, then you have to have sort of one of the best 4 ideas in any given day in order to get covered. So that's it's a very competitive picture. We like to be first. We like to get information ahead of time, and I do follow my curiosity, I think, and I sort of pride myself on that, as opposed to following some kind of coverage doctrine. I don't always stick to just definitely not just VR, but games is what I mostly focus on. Um, but I'm also a tech writer. I cover the chip industry still, and a lot of the stories that I would do will run on Venture Beat as opposed to Games Beat, and so I have some flexibility to move back and forth between industries, and that's what I like a lot is sort of the most interesting things sometimes are the seams between industries. Like I can sort of more knowledgeably cover something like the next chip in the next PlayStation because of that, or understand why they're on a certain kind of production schedule. So I've and I also sort of like to take note of larger trends and cycles, and if I've seen a cycle before play out in some way, then it helps inform me for how I would cover sort of like another cycle. And VR has had many cycles so far, so I'll stop there too.
4
Yeah, and
articles a day. That just out of curiosity, are you writing for a day, or do you write like 30 and then schedule them out?
They vary. Like, I mean, it's very easy to get into 50 stories for something like CES, right?
Uh-huh.
And 30 stories for what used to be E3, or the Summer Game Fest now. So the variation is very dramatic, and sometimes it depends on what I'm doing that week. If I'm going to CES, I have a lot of tech stories and very few game stories, right? But yeah, there is. We like to plan out which embargoed stories are going to run, like in a given week, and I think that helps improve the chances for a lot of companies to get coverage. If I have a day full of meetings and I get surprised with a press release that goes live that day or that minute, then I can't necessarily just break out of the meeting and go and cover that. And if it's a few hours old at some point, by the time I get to it, then it's kind of too late for covering it as news, right? And so again, that concept of an embargo, telling people ahead of time, when a story can run, and prepping us, doing interviews with us ahead of time. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially for the kind of, sort of thoughtful coverage that we like to do on businesses. So getting information to us can never happen too early when a story or an announcement is coming up.
Having that context of how much you two are writing, I think is really helpful. Ben, with that much, I guess, like responsibility to make sure you're putting out quality content, how do you pick things that are relevant? Is it personal mixed with what's happening in today's world, i.e. AI, stuff like that? Or how do you think about that?
yeah, well, I mean, as a publication, we're already very focused, right? It's XR, right? If it's just like, oh, AI in XR, like that doesn't necessarily make it interesting for us. It needs to be like genuinely a good thing. But yeah, I'm with Dean in that I tend to like I have my own pure personal interests and curiosities. For me, I'm very interested in the design end of things. Other writers are going to have slightly different interests. And this makes an important point too. A publication is made up of a lot of different people. And although like almost every publication is going to have like a tip email address or like tip form that you should go find in order to make an initial outreach, it would be even better if you read the publication, spent a day or so familiarizing yourself with articles that are similar to what you're doing, and starting to see if you can find like specific authors. If you can find a specific author and reach out to them, say like, hey, I understand like you were interested in this topic. I read your article on this other thing and I thought it was really good. I thought you might be interested in seeing what we're working on. Like that is a more effective, like, semi-warm intro than just, hey, I don't know who's reading this, but we're sending it to a general tip kind of tip inbox. That'll get you a little bit further. And I also just want to take 1 second to step back. Like, I don't want to take it for granted that everyone knows exactly what like Dean and I are talking about after the years and years of experience we have with this. We keep using this word pitch, and if you fundraise, you probably get this, but if not, when we say pitch, we're talking about like kind of a packaged idea. And so as it relates to press, if you reach out to us and say, hey, we're studio, XYZ, and we're building VR stuff, that's not really a pitch for me. Like now I have to come in and probe for answers and figure out if you're actually doing anything interesting. That becomes much more challenging. Whereas if you said we're Studio XYZ, we're launching a game that is like the first of its kind or is doing something truly unique. Basically, the idea is when you're sending a pitch to press, you're suggesting a story to them. You're saying, this is a cool thing that we're doing. Here's the information. We think you should check this out, right? You're suggesting the story that you'd like them to write. Maybe they go a different direction. Maybe they see something else in what you're doing that they want to write about. But this pitch is a pretty kind of tight, singular idea that, like a story idea. It's not like, here's our whole company, like interview our founders and, talk about our backgrounds. It's like, here's our product and we're making it because it does this really interesting thing that you don't find anywhere else, right? Like that's a pitch. Or we're making an announcement of a new product or a new game. So yeah, think in terms of pitching. It can be like, you can think of it like a press release if that's helpful. That structure of that is useful. Kind of like, you can even think of your own headline. Is it an appealing headline that you would see on a website? And you can send that. Publications aren't going to use your headline, but you're using your headline to get their attention in the same way that a writer uses a headline to get the attention of readers. So again, wrapping kind of back around to understanding your audience in this case, which is publications and the people who write for them.
I think a lot of people in the audience, myself included, we are familiar with fundraising, to your point. So like, there's a general agreed template for pitch decks. There's a general cadence of how you send emails. I'll give this one to Dean and then also Ben. Do you two have, is there like a technical format that you prefer? How should people actually deliver something to you? Do they write up the whole press release in a certain format?
Well, the funny thing now is that I'm getting a lot of AI generated press releases, and
I'm sure those are really good, right?
I think for the first time this week, a PR firm actually disclosed, this press release was written with AI, and
Yeah.
I was going, oh well, nice of them to disclose that, but I can spot it anyway, because they seem to follow, I guess somebody's doctrine of you have to make like 3 big points or something in a particular sort of section of a
And don't forget to say conclusion at the end.
Yeah, so like there's like 3 or 4 bullet points in most of these AI written, chat GPT generated press releases, and they're they try to end with some very impactful sort of one line at the end, and yeah, it's very sort of robotically written, and it is kind of funny how just how many of these come in sort of seemingly unaltered from what chat GPT spits out. So that's not so great for trying to be, I guess, original and catchy. I think if I see that whole sort of framework right off the bat, then I'm going to think, okay, this is nothing like what I would actually write when I were telling somebody about this company or this story, I guess, right? So that's one point.
Yeah, I think the kind of the press release format, I think, is just it's just a really helpful starting point. And again, you don't have to say, here is our press release. You don't have to use those words necessarily, but if in terms of pitching it, saying, here's kind of our headline, this is what we think is important, a little bit about what we're doing right now, and then usually at the bottom, a little background on the company, when it was founded, how big you are, that kind of thing. Honestly, if you just go kind of do a little bit of cursory research on how to write a press release, that format is going to work really well. It's giving the summary details. And then in addition to that, the web is just incredibly visual these days. So if you can include some decent imagery at a minimum, some photos, or maybe even better, people love trailers, people love to get the information that way. It's going to be easier for people to write a story if they have assets that are already solid, that are right there, especially if you're doing something that's just like really needs to be visually communicated, right? If you have a beautiful game or piece of software you're making, you want people to see that. You don't want it to just be purely described in text. So, I would call these like assets typically, or a press kit. would have these kinds of pieces of media together and just the basic information. Again, it's story suggestion, and you're trying to give them stuff to kind of make their job a little easier because you're just inching up the chances that they're going to be able to write something if they don't have to dig halfway across the web, through 12 of your different like socials to piece together the background information.
And as much as I hate press releases sometimes, I hate even more when they're not there, right? And so like I will ask, where's the press release? And they say, oh, we don't have one. And it's like, oh, blog post or fact sheet, anything, right? And sometimes they don't have these things, but they will say, but here's an hour-long video where you can watch, and learn everything we have to say, right? And I'm going like, okay, this is not helpful. There are things like fact checking someone's name spelling, right? That a press release is magically wonderful for. Any kind of terms, like anything that might have an unusual spelling and things like that. I mean, press releases definitely help prevent a lot of unnecessary corrections, that just pop up when you make assumptions about like, okay, this is what this means and all that, right? Or this is how somebody named Smith would spell their name, right? Things like that.
And I feel like I understand press is not the same thing as marketing, but if you look at organic social, or like when I write blog posts, things of that sort, and I study that, the number one thing that everyone tells you is the hook is the key to getting enough eyeballs and getting people into the story. Is that what you look for? Is that what you've trained, I guess, yourself to look for over the past few decades of doing this? Or what is the number one most important thing that founders should keep in mind when they do send you a story?
It is definitely important to make your pitch, interesting to the people that you're pitching to. But I would say a pre-packaged hook, which is like real specifically like how you're going to get people into the story. Probably Dean's the same, and for us too. That's a little bit more our job, is to find out with like whatever you send us and however hyped it is, to understand, is it real news? Is it interesting? And then we'll figure out how to, if we think it's worth writing about and people worth hearing about, even if it sounds dry the way you sent it to us, we'll try to explain to people why they should care about this, why it is exciting. So it'd be perfectly fine to have just a straightforward, Studio XYZ is announcing this game, or the release date, or our product is coming out on this date, as kind of your headline pitch. As long as you make the case that it's an interesting thing, your odds, go up for coverage. And then, it's kind of, like I said, our job to figure out how to make other people want to click into that article and read it.
I like to ask questions about things that can lead to getting or extracting, sort of the right inspirational or magical or just memorable sort of things about each company, or and so I asked the question like, what inspired you to start this startup, right? There's always some kind of story there. Is there anything else you want to tell me, is usually the question I end with, because I get surprising answers sometimes about things I have not thought to ask, but they come up. And I think relatable notions, things that make people feel. There was I just wrote a story about the next playground motion sensing game console, right? That's hitting stores later this year. And it's a motion sensing game. They had Fruit Ninja with it, and the president was telling me that, oh yeah, I've always had this sort of special memory in my head of my mother in her 70s playing a video game for the first time with me on the Nintendo Wii, and actually being able to learn it, without knowing how to use a controller, and by playing with like the remote for bowling, right? And it's like I had the same kind of sort of experience with my mother as well, and so when you get those sort of pieces of information, it sort of humanizes the story. It makes does lead to much more readable stories. We haven't gotten to one of these sort of reverse subjects of like, with a lot of stories, people are coming after us, right? But when something's really good, then we're chasing after them. It's like the paparazzi effect. It's like, hey, everybody, let's go get that story because that's the story of the day, and we want it too. So chasing after Apple or something like that, right? Chasing after really strong rumors. I think like I usually like to get to things first, but I do remember that others went to E3 one year and wrote about Palmer Luckey and John Carmack, showing off a headset in the id booth. And so I went there the next day, and they said, "Oh, John's left for the day." Like it's funny how we get inundated with stuff, but then we actually go chasing after things that are sort of above a threshold for news, right?
Yeah, I think that's also worth bringing up. Timing your news is important. You should ideally be kind of reading these publications that you're interested in pitching to, you think are relevant to your industry, just to stay up on things generally speaking. But yeah, if it's like CES week and you're making some announcement that's not really related and you're trying to shoot that into an inbox of a press publication that's doing a ton of CES coverage, I mean, it's just going to get completely swamped in the noise. So being a little bit careful about when your announcements are going out, not making them like in the middle of like, Apple, like WWDC, it's just going to be all Apple week, right? Or all Apple day. And it's going to be really hard if you're just kind of a smaller company, smaller product trying to get that out there. So time your moments. Weekends aren't good ever. So stick to the weekdays and make sure that you aren't trying to step on top of big holidays, big conferences, or any other like crazy breaking news.
We're going to open up the floor for questions right after this next one. And this is on the point that you both just brought up, or Ben specifically you touched on. What are like the absolute, please don't do this, I will block you type of scenarios that you've seen over the years? Maybe some of the nightmare stories that rub you the wrong way.
I'd say a big one that gets to me is if someone ever comes back to you after you wrote something, and again, this very much ties into what I said. We're not your marketers. It's not our job to make your company look good. We'll have written sometimes, and every once in a while, somebody will come back and say, "Hey, thanks for writing about us. Can you put this trailer in instead of that one? And do you mind changing that paragraph to add that our launch is coming soon?" It's like, no, I wrote the article the way that I thought it was interesting. I put the information I thought was relevant that people need to know. It's not my job to go back and fix stuff for your marketing purposes. If there is a factual error, 100% reach out, say, "Hey, I noticed you guys got this wrong. I'd like to just make sure you have the right information here in front of you." And that's a fix every time, right? But to going that extra step of saying, "Do you mind, just kind of fixing this thing because, like, be a little better for us." Like we're just never going to do that. It's not our job. And you're basically asking us to do our job badly or do your job for you a little bit in terms of doing your marketing. So yeah, that is a red line that I really peeves me if people ever cross that.
And that's especially brutal because they've already gotten their foot in the door and now they've ruined their opportunity to go deeper. Sorry, Dean, I cut you off there.
Yeah, I feel Ben's pain on post publication corrections that are mistakes that say the PR people make in sending something wrong to us and then needing to fix it. Yeah, it's the web. It's it's infinitely fixable. But yeah, it's a little annoying. I have small pet peeves too, like for some reason somebody decided that 6 a.m. Pacific time on a Tuesday is the best time to release a story and release your news. On the thinking that, well, we're catch people on the East Coast, we're catch people on the West Coast, and we're also catch Europeans before they quit for the day, right? And so it's turned out that Tuesday at 6 a.m. is the most uncommon embargo time I get now. And, there could be days where there's like 15 embargoes pitched to us. a Tuesday, and there's like 2 for Monday, and 5 for Wednesday, and none for Friday through Sunday, right? So I think like quite often I just go back and ask them to change their time so that we can sort of level out the stories we're going to do during the week. And pet peeves, I don't like written interviews as much because that quite often means that there's PR inserted into the middle of that, right? And it's not really coming from the person who I'm allegedly interviewing. I understand that there's translation problems a lot of time, and live translation will sometimes be preferable, to written interviews. Pre-approval on questions and things like that. That's never that exciting to me. But especially in places like Hollywood, they love to make these demands on journalists just to see how much they can get away with. And it does become annoying, and at some point, you either decide to put up with it or to not put up with it and go with the next story that doesn't have such restrictions on it.
Yeah, quickly on pre-approval too, you just reminded me. Also, it's never a good idea to say, "Can we look at your story before you publish it?" Never.
Yeah, it sort of reflects some desire of prior restraint on journalists, and I think the whole notion of an independent press really means that you should not be asking for that. You can ask for you can send me your press release, you can send me your fact sheet, you can send all of the things that need clarification before we write the story, for sure. And you can also put in correction requests after as well. But we don't like the prior review because it suggests an attempt to manipulate our opinions, right? About what the story is.
And it's like you two said at the beginning, you're not there for marketing purposes. You're there to report to the readers. And so you're right. That's a veil that shouldn't be lifted up here. All right. So Ryan, I'm going to unmute you. I have a million questions on embargo, but we have a bunch of questions lined up. So Ryan, if you can slip that into your question somehow also, I'd appreciate it, but go for it.
I had them on my list, but I got too many questions already.
All
First
right,
of all,
never mind.
Ben, Dean, great to see you guys again. I'll just dive in because you guys have a ton of interesting stuff to talk about. First, right off the top, how do you guys think about working with PRs? And do you like it? Not? When would you expect startups to use them or not? When does it work? When does it fail?
Yeah, I'm fine with PR. With bigger companies, it's never not going to be a thing. It is nice to be able to talk directly to the founders, to the creators, because sometimes, I mean, at least we are a very niche publication. We're like really drilling down on XR specifically, and we're people who use this technology all the time. So like if I'm talking to a PR who they are this middle layer between them and the company, but they don't really know that much about the topic themselves. They just kind of know how to formulate, press release or reach out to people. Then it's like, and I have to go through 2 layers to get good information back and forth. So I don't love that. If you are a PR who is in this conversation, just send the questions straight to the founders or the creators and get them back, and that's really helpful. Getting back an answer that is like kind of obviously not very informed is kind of annoying, just because we're going to have to re-clarify and say this is actually what I was asking at a more simple level. And if it were the founders or the creators we were talking to, they would know exactly what we meant.
Founders only, by the way. Didn't invite any press.
Hey, you never
thank
know.
you,
They
Ryan,
sneak in
for the
here.
question.
No press?
Yeah.
Whoa.
No.
Can I tack some more on? I got a bunch of questions. I know there's a bunch in the queue here.
I got to go through. We got
Okay.
7.
All right. Thanks, guys.
I would just concur, and yeah, I do appreciate the work that the PR people do, but connecting us and staying out of the way and sort of being the conduit for information back for us, that's the most appreciated role that PR folks have. It's less exciting when they're blocking our access in some way, or otherwise, spinning something. And so I think startups, they can learn how to do their own pitches, without PR folks. The bigger the company, more likely you're going to have PR folks anyway. Um, and PR people who know the space also sort of know what to send us. Like some of them I've been working with for decades, and so there's a level of trust that I have for them that the baseline pitch I'm going to get is probably a story, right? So, I think that's the advantage of hiring PR people, is that you're hiring people who likely have some kind of relationship with the writers involved.
And I just want to, sorry, kick in here real quick. Otherwise, I might just not be able to fit it in, but I feel like one piece of advice that I end up like surprisingly giving that is people, it seems uncommonly known, is if you're a founder, if you're a developer, if you're a creator, you're building something, and it's an equal part of building that thing is letting people know that thing exists. So I very, very often hear from people who are building something that it feels like marketing, press, these activities, it's just expense. And like your project's over here, and then like marketing is a cost. Really, building the thing and making people aware of it, that's part of building the thing. It's all under the same umbrella. That is to say, like marketing shouldn't be an afterthought after you build this great thing. It should really be something that is part of the plan that's going to give you the best ROI, and not treating it as an afterthought is the way that you're going to use it most effectively, instead of saying, oh, well, we spent 4 years building this thing and then we spent 2 weeks trying to get people to be aware that it exists. Like that's probably not the ideal balance. So just being aware that marketing is something that unfortunately is part of building stuff, and making it happen is key. Getting those, not just seeing it as cost is important. Build it into the plan.
If you're not marketing and selling, you can't continue with your mission. So altruism doesn't help in those scenarios. Amy, thank you for being patient there. By the way, I love your background. I'm going to ask you to unmute and please ask your question. Also, if we can, I want to try to power through as much as possible so we can make sure we get through everybody's questions, please.
Oh, yes. So I'm trying to make this as official as possible. And I accidentally sent this to somebody. So I'm putting my 4 things in the chat. I want to know, what's the best preceding time frame for you? How do you like your demos, whether it's in person or asymmetrical? What are the best press kit assets that you love to get? And is it useful to include a quote from a member of the team in the press release, because it makes it sound more personal for you? So I put those 4 things in the chat.
Dean, you want to jump on that?
What was the first one? Preceding, like how much time?
Yeah, like you obviously don't want us to hit you up too soon, but like, is a month too soon, or is 2 weeks great, or I don't know. What's your preference?
It's a good question.
I mean, it's always nice when somebody knows the day that they're going to publish something, right? And so you could tell me a month ahead of time, like this story is going to come on, July 1st or something. I would appreciate that. I guess what that creates though is like this long window where, like, if you sent a press release at the beginning of that stage, and then one arrives later, that is totally different, then I try not to make the mistake of writing something that's under embargo too early, because inevitably some last minute changes come in with edits that come from all these approvals, and so that kind of messes up the story that I was going to publish, and now I have to go back and rewrite it. So like I asked for a week because that also gives me time in a busy schedule to schedule an interview in case it is very interesting and it's worth an interview. As for demos, I can take either. Until the pandemic, we didn't really have figured out a good way to do game demos, but since then, lots of folks have been making use of cloud demos or Discord, and so it's possible. And yeah, I don't always really want to travel someplace to get to something, but I will go, up to San Francisco, which is quite a trek for me, occasionally down to LA to get in-person demos, and I do travel around to different shows where demos are possible too.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. 1 to 2 weeks is probably a pretty good place to start. Like 24 hours before is just, if we might get lucky and we might have a moment where we can catch that, but at least a week that'd be awesome. More than 2 weeks starts to get a little bit too long, just where it's like, other stuff can come up. And then, yeah, demos in person is great if you don't have to, if you're at a conference, but if it's a piece of software, either something you can do on a screen or in a headset, the easier access people can get to that in terms of press people, probably the better odds you have of getting something written. Because if we have to travel to another state or another city to try your thing versus literally try it that day, if you just put it in that email, a link to a build, that is so much more convenient and means that we're more likely to jump on that opportunity.
Awesome questions, Amy. Great background as well. Jeff, go for it. Question.
Hey guys, thanks for taking the time out today. So yeah, I want to ask, like, as a startup founder of a very early stage startup, to Ben's point, thinking about marketing and awareness as part of the product development cycle. But to you guys, like, what is too early? Or I guess, like, what's the right time in a startup's life cycle to start approaching press and bringing you guys into the process? And related, is there a company size that's like too small for you to deal with? How do you think about that kind of stuff?
At least for us, I'd say size is kind of irrelevant. Sometimes we write stuff that is like completely unknown and made by a solo indie developer. If they're doing something interesting, especially if it's personally interesting, again, like design stuff, there's a real chance that gets coverage over, the latest whatever from a huge company press release, because it depends. But yeah, no size I would say is too small for us in terms of what we'll consider. Really, if it looks professional, if you are doing your job well, that's what's important. And then as it relates to like where in the life cycle, the timing is going to be completely dependent on what you are doing and what milestones you think are important. And again, this is where like kind of reading the press and understanding, like, if you do a lot of reading, you'll understand what's interesting. And if you understand what's interesting, you'll know when you have a story in your company. You'll know, like, oh, we just passed this milestone that no one's reached before, or our launch is coming up. We just raised money. Money raising stories are always very interesting for us. So it's timing completely dependent on, do you have a story to pitch? Think about it that way, and then you'll kind of think about along the way, hey, we just got a working prototype, hey, we just launched a beta, right? These are all like potential milestone kind of stories. So think about it in terms of what you think is like really story worthy, or one concise thing you can put into a pitch that somebody could write an article on. That's probably a moment to do your outreach.
I think milestones are a good way to think about your story opportunities, and it's not just one opportunity that a startup is going to have, but many, like, there are ones related to coming out of stealth, and in that case, it doesn't matter how big or small the company is, for sure. There's getting a marquee customer of some kind. There's getting funding. Launch of a product, post-launch update. So there's all kinds of moments where you have the opportunity to get press. And if it's an important company, we'll write about it multiple times as well. So yeah, I sort of encourage people to come earlier, and at least sort of check in with me, or with our team, about like just where you are. Quite often companies that come to me early, I will our interview them, write a story. If it's worth it, then our send a email over to a bunch of VCs that I know that cover this space, and ask if anyone wants to meet them. And usually somebody does, and so I do that intro. So coming early, sometimes can be helpful. Of course, like if you're in a space with a lot of competition, maybe you don't want to come early because you're just sort of tipping off your competition.
Yeah, and real quick, I just add, keep pitching, right? You might have over the course of a year, you might have 3 or 4 moments that you think are story-worthy moments for your company. Maybe you didn't hear back from us or another publication for the first 1 or 2. Maybe the third one is interesting. Just because you don't hear back does not mean that it's not interesting. Personally, I read pretty much everything that comes through, and I probably can only get back to a little bit of it in a personal way. But I read all that stuff because it keeps me up to date. So like I like that. I like to be able to hear from the company. And then I also have kind of a history. If I were to go back, if I'm writing on your third milestone that you pitched me as the first article I write, I now have some context actually for where you've been, where you came from. So just keep pitching, send them out there till you find till something sticks.
And I do like to form relationships with companies like I take pride in sort of covering Zynga very early on in their history, and they exited as a $12 billion acquisition. I did the first interview with Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, and it was at a time when there were about 70 graphics chip companies that were all competing with each other, right? And so it's fun to see things grow and change over time. But it's also not a, say, commitment on our side to cover every single piece of news that a startup ever has, right? We'll consider every single piece of news, but we have to be selective. Especially, we're sort of also just time driven. Sometimes your timing is wrong, and if I have, I can get out 10 stories in a day, but at number 11, I'm just cutting it off and saying, "Going to sleep now." Sorry, your timing is bad, right?
That's an
Awesome.
awesome answer. Also, Dean, that's really cool to hear that you'll forward some of these to VCs as well. Thank you, Jeff, for that question.
Yeah, thank you
All
both
right,
for your
so
time.
we have 10 minutes left. I want to be conscious of Dean and Ben's time here. So, James, I'm going to pass to you because you're a collective member. Do you want to unmute yourself, ask a question here?
Okay. My mic's not the first, so.
No, thank you.
I can't hear.
James, we can't hear you. All right, Richard, also in the membership. Do you want to unmute yourself, ask your question? We'll come back to James.
Yeah, it seemed like we could hear you, James, for a moment, but then you cut off. So yeah, my question is around crowdsourcing, specifically like Kickstarter. That's really important to get press if you're going to do something like a Kickstarter where you have a certain amount of time to meet your goal and deadline. And I'm guessing you guys probably get bombarded by crowdsourcing Kickstarter things. So like specifically, if I'm going to do some kind of like VR experience and try to promote that, I think it's important to have like physical props. So for instance, I've got like a VR katana prototype that if I were to do a Kickstarter, I would try to promote something like that. So what are your guys' thoughts on crowdsourcing? Specifically, I'm thinking about like Tundra Labs. They released the Tundra Tracker, and I think if they didn't really promote that with the press, then probably they might have not reached their goal. And then another one I think was kind of cool was Dance Dash. They did a very successful crowdsourcing, but I don't know if they did a lot of press marketing. I think they did more like in person at like trade show events.
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in real quick and say that you are doing crowdfunding is not in itself a story. It's what you're actually building that's a story. It can be a great exercise because when you're crowdfunding, like you have to pull together all these assets and like all the information and like commonly asked questions that you're anticipating. So that's a good opportunity to go out for your press anyway, because like you already have kind of your pitch together, right? You're making a product pitch in most cases. But saying we're company X, we're launching a Kickstarter, not a story. We're company X, we're making this really cool product. Also, our Kickstarter happens to be launching. Like that's where you want to go with it. So don't lead with we are doing crowdfunding. Lead with what is interesting about your product and why people should hear about it.
Yeah, very much agree with that. I think that you could have 30 things ready to announce for 30 days of your Kickstarter if that's your time window. But those are different for I guess how we pay attention to them. when Exploding Kittens had their Kickstarter and they, quickly shot above 1 million in a day, and then they wound up with 8 million by the end of the 30th day. And they're only trying to raise 10,000. It tells you something, right, about the virality of the Kickstarter or the particular product. And so I like Kickstarters in that way. I think Kickstarter isn't as common as it once was in its heyday, and there's also different kinds of platforms where people can accomplish some of the same thing. So another interesting sort of milestone moment, but not necessarily, as Ben says, automatic news anymore.
Awesome.
Yeah,
James, is your microphone working? It's funny, Dean and Ben, how much your job parallels a VC investor's job. It's quite interesting. James, I'm going to give you a chance here. They're working. All right, he's out. All right, Brad, sorry I skipped you earlier. Bringing it back home here. Go for it.
Worries. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Dean, Ben, founder and CEO of Ecto VR. We make wearable footwear that is kind of like taking an omnidirectional treadmill and putting it on your feet. So hopefully pretty quick question. We've talked a lot about timing. Like what are the driest seasons for VR news? Like obviously middle of CES, middle of some of these events, you're getting bombarded with 1 million stories. When is it just like, I know it's never crickets out there, but where are the lulls where you're like, okay, where are the great stories, guys? Please reach out. Are there times?
Yeah, easy answer coming from XR land. Summer, 100% summer. It's just the slowest time, fewest conferences, fewest like new games and things, and basically the whole kind of like cycle of VR is very seasonal. It starts in summer and it ramps up into the holidays and comes back down after the holidays. Then you get back into your summer slump. So yeah, if you're looking for a good time to pitch something interesting and want to make sure that you're giving yourself a good chance, it's a great time.
Yeah, I'd agree. July and August are the most slow. Yeah, you do you benefit from being sort of in front of a lot of people at something like CES, but you can also very easily get lost in all that noise. And then for me in August, things will pick up at Gamescom, right? And there's just I go to that. There's lots of people who go. We get a lot of stories out of it. Not always sort of the same sort of opportunity for VR folks. I mean, like if VR doing a demo, then yeah, Gamescom is good for that. But mainstream game companies are getting a lot of coverage and news out of Gamescom these days. So I think there's very interesting opportunities in this space. Like Augmented World Expo is usually a very excellent show and opportunity for us to see sort of everything across the whole industry. Meta Connect is great for seeing meta related things for sure. Sometimes your partners can pull you into these events and get you more opportunity. But yeah, you can even think about dryness in terms of just the days of the week, like Friday through Monday for some reason. 4 days of the week are kind of like a no man's land for press releases and stories coming out, right? It's everything that happens on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, and there isn't I can't structure my work week like that, right? I still have to work Monday through Friday for sure. So different things to consider. Like the day, even be aware of the calendar. Like the day that Apple has an event, right? You're going to get drowned out on that day, right? So you have to pay attention to, WWDC in June or something like that, right?
Good. Makes sense. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the session.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
All right. Ryan, I'm going to give you the closing question, and then Dean and Ben, we very much appreciate your time here and for coming to join all of us. Wendelin, Mike, James, Brad, sorry if we didn't get to your full questions there. Go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, so previous guest, Pierre Rojas, I'm sure you guys both know him well, said it's absolutely imperative that startups these days have their own first-party content, that they got to have their own blogs, got to have their own outreach, be on social and everything like that. I'm curious if you guys can reflect on how us working with press like fits into that larger story, and like what is different about going to an actual media organization versus putting stuff on a blog. Do we have to withhold stuff from our blog if we want you guys to write about it, things like that?
It's a good question. Personally, I really appreciate it when a company or a brand has like one source of truth. Socials just can run off kind of the feed so fast that, to go digging through someone's tweets to verify a date when they announce something is kind of a pain. When a company has just their own URL and is consistent about putting the latest information on there, that is such a resource for me and for us if we're writing something, because we can go to one place and we can say, oh, okay, last year was when they first launched their product. Like there's a blog post with a date on it. I can see everything they were saying at that time. Extremely useful. So although yes, it is vitally important to be on various platforms, depending upon exactly what you're building. And press, we are one facet of marketing activities. I do feel like having that one source of truth that is like the most up to date is so valuable for press. Oftentimes people lean into Twitter because it's just easy and say, oh, we like announced it in a tweet, like the other week. But yeah, again, those things kind of disappear really quickly. And being able to, link somewhere, just dig in and say, here's our URL. Even when a company will have a website like that, and they will like on there oftentimes have links to their latest press kit, like so useful. If you didn't already send me a press release, but you did something that was interesting and I'm looking into your company, having your latest press kit, your latest screenshots, videos, whatever, all in that one place, incredibly useful. Just to add real quick, I think also this goes for customers too, right? They don't want to run all over to figure out what you're trying to say or what your brand like looks like or product is. Having one source of truth, they can just go right to your website and know that all their questions are answered there. That's great. So kind of 2 for 1 stone on that.
Yeah.
Dean, can I have you also answer Mike's question as the finale one?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just nice to have a chronology sometimes too, right? Just especially for companies that are developing long histories. So.
That's smart.
Cool. Thanks for fitting me in, guys. I was just hoping maybe I could get some real-time feedback on a recent press release. So I dropped the link in our chat there, and I think I'm doing things pretty well, but from the sounds of it, yeah, let me just drop it in the chat.
There's a lot
cool.
of oh, let's
Here, I'll repost it down at the bottom.
There we go. Yeah.
Cool experiment.
And we do have a website, and we post all our news on the website, so we do have that
awesome
history there.
Yeah, let me see if I can get this loaded.
Yeah.
I'm getting a service unavailable. That might be on my end. I'm not sure.
Me as well.
Yeah, well, actually, that quick point then,
yeah.
if you are working in the XR space, if you ever want to get information to us at Road to VR, tips@roadtovr.com, you are welcome to send stuff there. Again, you may not always hear back, but that is the open door anytime, all the time, to send information that you think is interesting enough, that somebody might want to write about it. So if you want to send that press release over there, if relevant, please feel free.
Yeah, you can send me at dean@venturebeat.com. So,
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Looks like we tanked my website. That's good.
Good traffic.
Yeah.
We respect the hustle. All right, let's clap it up. If everyone could unmute themselves. Thank you, Dean and Ben. We appreciate that very much. That was awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here. I'm sorry, Don, that I can't hang around for the rest of the session, but I appreciate you having me.
Yep. We are honored to have both of you. Thank you very much. And we record it, so I'll type up my own little press release here and send it to everybody and try to summarize the lesson. So thank you very much to you both.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thanks. Seems up now.
Thank you.
I don't know what happened.
Thank you, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Thank you, Dean. All right. What did everybody think of that?
Great.
Missed the first.
Yeah, I think, say it again.
Missed the first 20 minutes. I couldn't get in. Zoom was at capacity.
I messed up, and I don't know why my Zoom had 100-person limit. And so I was like half asking questions and half trying to pay for Zoom. That was I felt horrible. That was very bad. But all right, so we'll go through this wrap up here. It's funny how much there's parallels to fundraising and what they're doing in the press. Like everything I heard there is directly correlated to how you would get investors' attention and then how you pitch them and all of those things. All right, so I always wrap up these conversations with a story and a presentation and then talk about the Spatial Collective. And so this is a quote a lot of you have heard me say before: locked doors aren't there to keep you out. They're there to see how badly you want to get in. I love this quote because the way I think about sales, fundraising, press, anything is that there's basically three doors, or there's one door and there's three ways to get in. There's just knocking on that door over and over. And that is the equivalent of hustling or cold emailing, which is one way to get into those locked doors. The second way to get into those locked doors is you arrive with a mutual friend and they were, invited, and then they bring you with. So that's your network. That's having warm introductions. That's the second way to get into these types of doors. And then the third one is that you're actually invited personally. And that is directly related to the press. So when someone sees you in some of these articles, it gives you instant credibility. And then all of a sudden they're inviting you over. And so this is a personal story. This was back when I was 22 years old. I was moving to Los Angeles. I had my first job in LA. I was so excited to go. Everything in my life was set out. I had a roommate planned out. I had paid for my apartment. My salary of 60K was like the most money I'd ever thought of in my entire life. Everything was going amazing. And so I write this article. This is why this story is related to the press. I write this article July 2015, 3 days before I'm about to move to LA. And it was about the Steven Spielberg virtual reality company. I published it in Upload VR and didn't think much about it at all. All of a sudden, I get a phone call out of the blue, and it's a guy named Savannah Ram who was working for a virtual reality venture fund and movie studio in San Francisco. And he said, "Hey, Don, I just read your article. I want you to come work for us." And it was a better job opportunity. And they were actually the fund that owned the company that I was going to work for in LA. And so literally 3 days before I was going to move to LA, I had everything set up. I made the decision that I was actually going to San Francisco instead of LA. And I ended up taking this job. And like basically my entire life changed because I published semi well-written article in the press. And I think a lot of people sometimes are afraid to put themselves out there because you do get bashed. Like you should see some of the emails I get. It's really wild. It's just like it's hard to put in that amount of effort when you don't know if there's a guarantee. But this is a good example of how much getting yourself out there in the press and the reasons why this is important can impact you. Literally, as a 22-year-old, I would have been in LA. I probably wouldn't have gotten into venture capital in the same way. Like my whole life would have been different. But because of that one article, because I happened to get lucky, I ended up moving to San Francisco. And then a lot of you have seen this. This is why I ended up sleeping in those couches. This was the heart of the reason, was because when I moved to San Francisco and took this job, I got to San Francisco and the CEO of that company told me that nobody had permission to hire me. And so they had a $0 salary. So literally I went from living in LA with a job to moving to San Francisco to then moving there and realizing I didn't have a job. Anyways, it's just like over and over and over. Entrepreneurship is this unpredictable journey. And I can't emphasize this enough. I think, putting yourself out there and just going with the flow is I like your LOL, is the most important thing. I've seen this with Rec Room. I've talked about, we met them when they had $0 fundraise. They went to 200 million. Like that, to watch and to know that that's possible is really influential. I remember sitting there with Nick, we had our first time meeting was over a beer, and he's telling me how he's going to create this whole app and how they're going to raise all this money. And I'm like, maybe, like, who knows? And so when I meet so many different founders now, I never, ever discount anyone. It's like, yes, every single person out there has the ability to go do this. I've seen it so many times. And then on the flip side, you don't need to go raise 200 million. You can be Sophie from Virtual Speech, who's basically done this with almost $0 of fundraising. And she has a team of 15. She's been operating her business for a decade. Like, she's absolutely killing it. So there's like many ways to succeed in entrepreneurship. But the one thing that you got to realize is that it's about knowledge, network, mindset. It's not about how much funding you have. That is the least important thing. The funding will find you if you have the right knowledge, the right network, the right mindset. Those are really critical things. This is what I talk about all the time. We do all these founder workshops in the Spatial Collective. This is something that I love doing this. Like, to me, working with founders is the most fun thing. I get to see people, I get to know people over time. Yeah, I mess up too. Like, I had 100-person Zoom limit on this, but that's just a part of building these businesses. And so it's very cool to build this Spatial Collective and feel like we're growing with these founders. The other thing we're doing is mentor workshops. So I'll talk about the upcoming schedule for all the current members. And if anyone wants to join, you can also do that. We just had this one today. Awesome. Two great people, really unique perspectives on how you go get press. 2 weeks ago, we had the founder of AWE, Ori, who is a badass, came and chatted with the collective and was able to answer questions. Last week, we had Peter. I honestly started tearing up at the end of that conversation because he's just so empathetic towards founders, and like, you could really hear it in his voice. And I just felt like he was really there to help. He stayed for an hour and a half plus whatever it was to help everybody. And then I'm doing one in 2 weeks as well, where we just basically sit down for 2 hours. So upcoming in August, we have 4 announcements here, I think. Moritz, who is the head of Lightspeed Gaming Investing, he's going to come and chat with us. This guy their fund manages $25 billion, a lot of money. He's one of the very few people that can write $100 million check into an AR/VR company and also go down to the $1 million check. So his perspective is going to be incredibly cool to get. Lightspeed's one of the best funds. Ryan, goodbye. Then after this, we're going to move more into, instead of just fundraising, I want to focus on sales and marketing and try to like really help us learn how you get organic press. So Zach Mulligan was nice enough to come agree to chat with us. He has 200,000 plus subscribers on YouTube. He's going to talk about how do you, and on TikTok, 150,000, Instagram, 50,000. Like, he's going to basically talk to us about how do you think about an organic marketing campaign. His unique aspect is that he does animation, VFX, things of that sort. And so it very much applies to the visual nature of VR. So having his perspective is going to be awesome for us to learn from. After that, we have Inga, who's coming on August 21st. She's also going to touch on the marketing and sales side of stuff. They have 300,000 projects that have been created in Shapes XR. I'm sure some people on this call have used the app. I would bet on that, and have done some prototyping with it or are continuing to use it today. And she's also raised 8 million from VCs. So she has a really good perspective around how you do sales and marketing, how you raise money. This will be an AMA style thing. So she'll come in, and then exclusively with the members, we'll be able to go through and try to learn from how she built out this company. And then to wrap the month up, we have Anand and Maymay coming. When I worked at Meta, Maymay and I were the same role, and then Anand was our boss. These two are the two people responsible for all of the new lifestyle applications. So they make all the decisions around who's getting funding. They also know what's coming around the corner. So we're going to do that as well. And that'll be really cool to come bring them. And then we have Nico, who was the lead investor in my last startup. They invested 600 grand from their fund, and he's just like the coolest person ever. I love him. So that'll be similar to Peter, because Nico's kind of like an older brother of mine. This is school. This is, I'll do this real quick and then open the floor for any final questions. These are where you can go RSVP to all these, the Q&A with me, the Lightspeed with, or the Moritz one, Zach, they're all here. So you can go through here, register yourself. And then really quickly to show off what school is, I think this is one of the coolest platforms out there. It's basically like a mini Facebook, for a private Facebook. So you come here, you become a member. I'll scroll real fast because there's private stuff, but everyone's able to post stuff about what they're doing. People comment. I'm starting to see founders helping each other out. It's just a very, very cool platform. And then for anyone that hasn't gone through these, or if anyone wants to join and go through these, I do a bunch of conversations with people in my network and then post the recordings here. So this is with Ross, who was a YC founder. He sold his AR company back in the day to Niantic. And so, he's 100% like the first person you should go here and start watching, in my opinion. Is really unique person. And so you have an hour long or a 30-minute interview you can watch. There's also someone from Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins. And then as we do these private ones and these public events, I'll post them in here as well. So there's a bunch of different stuff you can go watch. And then last but not least, after you get a certain amount of engagement points, you can go in here and there's an XR database that has customers, investors, and people within the press. So both Dean and Ben are in there, so you can go in there and email them. I'll add their emails now that I know they're allowing us to email them. But this is like a really cool way to kind of get a landscape of who you should be reaching out to if you are looking to make sales. We've done some work around what are past products these businesses have bought. So Duke from Nike bought from Q Real an AR try-on experience. To me, this is like a gold mine. I love cold emailing. I would just sit in front of this for the next week and cold email people. And I have done that and will continue to do that. So overall, it's just like an amazing thing we have going on here. We're trying to build it into a #1 resource for AR VR founders. And so with that, I will stop. I'll post the link into the chat if anyone wants to join us. And then do we have any questions from anyone in the audience that wants to maybe give like their thoughts or questions or concerns with the last stuff that we just saw from Dean and Ben? And how do you think that compares to fundraising in your experience, as well as what do you kind of take away from seeing that you would do differently now that you're trying to get press? So I'll open the floor to everyone and we can just have a nice conversation to close it out. All right, I'll start. And anyone feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and talk. I felt like that was really eye-opening for me. I remember when I was doing my last startup, there was I won't say which person, but somebody interviewed us and they ended up publishing this article that was like, our startup or this startup grew 2000% in 2 months. And I remember reading it and thinking to myself, like, this is not really accurate. And to me, it was like almost very apparent that publication did all this interviewing of me and then writing this like insane story that honestly wasn't that true, just so they could sell subscription. So halfway through my own article that I was featured in, all of a sudden it's asking me to do the subscription. And so it was like, I don't have any issue with sales. I think that's great. Like, you need to stay alive as a business, but I felt like that really rubbed me wrong on the press. That person, however, was, 2 years into their career. I think hearing Dean and Ben today was a stark difference from my experience with the press. Those two really care about what they're doing, and they clearly love this technology. I will message Dean on LinkedIn and he'll sarcastically say back to me, "Oh, I thought VR was dead." Every time I send him a good thing, he'll go, "Oh, but VR is dead, right, Don?" Like, this guy for years has been a believer and doesn't need to. Ben, I mean, Ben started Road to VR in like 2000. And he's written, I think he told me, don't quote me, I think he said 10,000 articles himself. So those are two people that I think listen to their advice. It's really important to do what they said. Go take a week, and instead of just emailing them your press release now, I would read all their articles that they've written in the past. I would watch some of their videos. I would really learn like who they are and what they're looking for. And then I would rewatch this presentation we just did, and I would take note of exactly what they're looking for in the formats, because they told you they told you exactly how to go get coverage from one of them. So I think that was an unbelievable opportunity they gave us, where they really were like, hey, here's how you do it. We're not going to, do it for you, but if you do these things in this format. And so I felt like that was really important. I'm personally going to do that as well. Like, I'd love to get some coverage. So I'm going to go try to write up my own press release, learn how they're framing, how should I include assets, even small things like file size matters when you submit to, like I just did this thing with Ben where we submitted something to his website, and I was sending files that were too big. And so he had to go back and redo stuff because I wasn't prepared. So I think there's just a lot of small stuff that really makes a huge difference in your ability to get press. And then Kim, I will try to do a write-up summary. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And then the final thing I noticed was that is exactly like a VC. Dean even said it when he gets a really hot startup or a hot story, he has a list of VCs that he forwards that company off to. And then usually those VCs will get interested. So I see getting press now in a much different light than I did before, where you're actually fundraising. Another direct comparable of something they said was, send us, 3, 4, 5 stories, and eventually we'll like catch on with your chronological progression, and eventually we'll be able to write something about you. That is exactly how investors work. I will send 6, 7 emails before I even get a response from those investors, but I do it all in the same email chain. And it's always like, hey, here's a quick update about our company. We just closed our first customer. Hey, we just got a milestone of 15K MRR. Just like those things are directly comparable in the press and in investors, just like constant updates. And then the final thing that Dean touched on that's very comparable to VC was he talked about relationships. It's silly to think you're just going to cold email Dean, who gets hundreds of emails a day, 1,200 a week plus, and be able to get a story with him. But if you add value, you ask him something about, what are you looking for? What are your life? And like start to build that relationship slowly, then I think it is possible to get featured. I first cold emailed him in 2015 as a 22-year-old, and, still he hasn't featured me, but like maybe one day, fingers crossed. All right, Patrick, I saw you had your hand up there, and then Emily second as well. Patrick, go for it.
Sorry, not actually a question. So I'm going to paste in the chat a link. A friend of mine fairly recently interviewed Dean on her podcast, and I haven't watched the full thing yet, but she told me that he explains how he likes to be pitched specifically on there. So I'll hit awesome. Enter on it, and like, for example, I saw him at GamesBeat and like walked up to him and like put my hand on his shoulder, was like, hey, and I swear he didn't even look at me. So like, feel like I should probably watch that right about. So yeah, anyway, I just shared it. So if anybody finds it useful.
That's awesome. I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna repost that, and then I'm also gonna copy it over here. Yeah, that's a great idea. Emily, amazing to see you. Wow.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Don. Hi, everybody. I'm good. This was amazing. I think that these are perhaps more comments because I've worn multiple hats in XR, a founder, also doing some thought leadership stuff myself with writing. And I wanted to say, I really agreed with you, Don, about putting yourself out there. I think that one of the things that sets apart founders is when they're able to really create a voice for themselves so that they're known on LinkedIn or wherever. So I think that that's one of the things I've heard really helps founders is creating their own brand as the CEO or as the person that's, putting themselves out there. And I think that going to the press is one way to do it, but I think sort of being disciplined about putting your own story out there and in your own voice is really, really important. And second of all, so that's just one comment. And then the other thing is that I walked the show floor at AWE, and this sort of has to do with what Dean was saying. They're bombarded leading up to AWE, the press, and everybody gets like hundreds of emails. And then not only that, when you're at these booths or you're at the, seeing the exhibitors, they are often missing the point of what the value proposition is of their company. And they're really focusing on the weeds of this technology does this little, this thing better than some other company. And I feel like if you're unsure about your story, I just kind of wanted to add that it's really important to nail the value proposition and what the bigger story could be. And so maybe you have some thoughts about that, but as I see so many founders here in the chat or in this call, and I'm just thinking like, that was my biggest takeaway, was that still there's a disconnect on the translation between what the value proposition is and what the real story is. And so those are my thoughts about people as they're sort of maybe struggling with this or trying it for the first time. So
Do you have one bit of advice on how people would straighten their thinking out in that scenario?
yeah, I think try to imagine who's listening, who's sitting across the table from you, who are you trying to tell your story to? Are you going to try and tell it to an investor? Are you trying to tell it to a potential user? And then talk about I would say, what motivated you to create this product and why it matters. I think a lot of times we are not hearing that, and instead it's like I said, I can't tell you how many pitches at AWE where I was seeing people talk about it, but they weren't like connecting. They weren't connecting with why it was so valuable. And you can tell me what it is, but not why it's valuable. And so I think that's really just part of the storytelling arc about why why are you doing what you're doing?
Dean said,
I'm going to add to that, Don.
Yep, go
And
ahead.
Emily. Yeah. The other thing that I see often happens is that people use industry jargon or Emily said like in the weeds, but just maybe looking at it in a too technical way. Of course, this is a very technical call. Obviously, Dean and Ben are very technical too, but still simplifying the way you're talking about it. You can think about it in different levels. And so on the top level is like the most simple that anybody would understand why this is important and what's interesting. And then take it, I'm saying down a level into like more and more technical and more specific, but have your overarching sort of log line or headline that's the most simple, that's just sort of plain language.
And I
agree, Joanna.
The way to do that is Joanna, correct me if I'm wrong, but humanizing yourself. Like everyone can relate to someone that made a mistake. Everyone can relate to love, like the basic human qualities. So I always try to think of the hook or like the top of funnel from that perspective.
Yeah, that's definitely one way. I think that's definitely one way to put it. I mean, yes, we're all human and thinking why it's relevant to people. But yeah, what I was referring to is like sometimes people, and this is where it's great to have, another founder friend or somebody else that's not you or not in your company that you can bounce the ideas off with and see if they get it too.
Someone that's not in VR, you're saying, or like someone that's
maybe someone not in VR or somebody in like another aspect of VR, just that can understand clearly what you're saying, and in like a 3-word thing and a 5-word thing, something really short and sweet. Yes, that doesn't say everything their company does, but that's like the beginning, and then if you'll see if they're interested, you keep going.
Same
it's
with the pitch deck.
Cocktail party. Your cocktail party is like
exactly.
Lead.
Yeah, like what's in it for me? Like that. Yeah, I think that like Joanna's like what the takeaway is, like what's the one thing I want you to remember after I've talked to you? Just tell me something that I can tell to somebody else that's exciting or cool, or what's in it for me, or why would I share this with anybody, right? Because I'm not going to remember 90% of the details. I'll just remember that one thing. And I think so, Joanna, like share it with somebody who's not in our industry, show it to somebody else, and boil it down. So yeah, that's important. Thanks so much, guys. I'll jump off the microphone, but I just want to say thanks.
No, we love
great.
that. Also, Emily, it's like amazing to see you again. Hello. That's awesome.
Absolutely. More soon.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying is spot on. It's like, people remember how you made them feel, not so much what you said. And I've seen great writers when I try to study them on YouTube or like great tweeters and like study them. Some of them will literally write just the feeling up top. So scared, angry, happy. And then everything they write from there is based around that feeling. I think I can't personally do that, but I think that's a really unique way to do some form of writing. Oh, now Emily's not talking. Okay, I see how it is.
No, I just didn't want to hog the mic. Sorry. No, but I agree. The feeling is what everybody remembers. You're 100% right about that. Now, as a founder who's struggling on, working on so many pieces of their company, from just even getting the idea out on paper and into the world, I think that it's hard to remember that you have to connect personally with people, right? You have to almost, like you said, like humanize this whole conversation about it. Yeah, but I think that this was really good. I see this, I see how the struggle is still real. And also I think there's a lot, maybe you have some other insight on this, Don. My other thought was, look, the XR press, like Dean and Ben and Road to VR, like, we have great ways to connect with them directly, but what about connecting with like bigger outlets? Like, would you consider Forbes to be the next level? Would you consider like outlets that have bigger reach or bigger readership? Or should these guys just be focusing on the game, the XR and gaming press in the short term? Like, what would you say?
A great question. So essentially you're saying, the people with the biggest outreach are Forbes, yada, yada, yada. And so is it worth your time to go after that as a founder?
It depends on the stage and where you are and how broad your story is.
Yep. It is. It all comes down to story. We got picked up. I had a little Forbes cover me with my last startup, Business Insider, Fast Company. And the reason that happened was nothing that I did uniquely. It was because I was, since 2017, building a virtual events company that involved avatars. And then COVID happened. And it was like, oh, now all of a sudden, now I'm a real story, because it's like, oh, this is a product where you can turn yourself into an avatar when no one's able to leave their home, and you can feel like you're next to somebody because of spatialized audio. Had COVID not happened, there's no way that they would have written about me, because it just wasn't an interesting enough story and we weren't a large enough company. So I think, to answer your question directly, Emily, and also Joanna, to touch on your point, it's about the story. And probably, given where the AR VR industry is right now, not many of us have a story that Forbes wants to cover, being realistic. However, there are people that are like Dean and Ben, and trying to bring more of them in here, that do cover stuff that where our industry is today. And eventually some crazy thing will happen that none of us can predict, and all of a sudden VR will be hot again. Zuckerberg will rechange the company name, whatever it is, and then you can go pitch the people in Forbes. So yeah.
And there's people that write in Forbes, like Charlie Fink, or I
was
think even
gonna say,
David
yeah,
Bloom,
Charlie,
that
yeah.
they're Forbes contributors. They're not like on paid staff of Forbes, but they have strong interest in this industry still.
That's the one to end on. Charlie is the person to go reach out to if you want to get in Forbes. He's done so much VR AR stuff specifically for Forbes. You're right, Joanna. He'd be the perfect person. Charlie Fink is the name to look up if you want to message him. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're at time. I'm so sorry about the Zoom thing. I don't know what happened. I'm glad everybody can get in that wanted to get in, but thanks for your efforts there, and have a great
John, one last thing to
day.
say about Charlie. He and Ted also have Roni have a podcast, so they need guests every single week. So that's another way to think about it.
Yep. Yeah, I wonder if we can do something. All right. I got my ideas turning. All right. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Have an awesome one. Same with Bob Cooney. Bob has a great podcast also. Bye, bye, bye.
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 Thanks. Take care.
Bye.